Okay, so one of the things Darwin pointed out that is worth relaying to you is when you think of this is very hard to get your mind around, but when you think of these, now we're going to go to this fourth secular, the third one, from 0 to 3. Do not think of these as do not think of these as stage theory, like we're 0 and then you leave 0 behind and then you go to 1, and then you leave 1 behind and you go to 2, and then you leave 2 behind and you go to 3. It's more like, I don't have a great analogy for this, but think of it as kind of like the way a genus forms, like almost evolutionary. Like we still have parts of secular 0 in us. It's there. It's still within our consciousness. It comes out. It's still somewhat embedded in our institutions, and secular 1 is still there. It still functions this way, and all of us have a little bit of secular 2 within us. So what does it then mean to live in secular 3? So I remember our question is the why question. Why does it feel so hard to be a pastor? And I don't think why it feels so hard is because of secular 2. I think it's easy to feel that way. Like the reason is we don't have enough. And if we had enough, then it wouldn't feel so hard. The pastor isn't relevant enough anymore. The church isn't relevant enough. If we just had more of that, it would be fine. It has its challenges. But I think what it really means to live in a secular age and what makes it so hard is secular 3. All right. So what do I mean, definition of what is secular 3? So secular 1 is there's a public-private divide, belief becomes private. Secular 2 is that fewer and fewer people are coming to church. This is secular 3. Secular 3 is that all belief becomes contested. Or another way of saying that is that all belief becomes fragilized, becomes very fragile. Belief itself becomes fragile. Now, this fragilization of belief, this fragilizing of belief, it has both a positive and a negative element to it. So I want to be clear about this. I don't mean like there's a thumbs up, a thumbs down. There's a good thing and there's a bad thing. I want you to think of it more like a battery where you have to have the plus and the minus lined up to get your remote control for your TV to work, which is all I know about electrical engineering. That's as far as it goes for me, people. So all I know is you got to have both a plus and minus. They have to work in tandem to get this thing to work. So inside of secular 3, the negative dynamic, the minus, is that transcendence as an overarching meaning system becomes more and more unbelievable to people. It's just harder for people to even have an imagination that it is possible that there is a living God who speaks to them. So this woman who says this to the chaplain, my guess is she needs a chaplain to be able to say that to, because she can't say it to her roommates. They would think that she needs a psychological review or something. Like it becomes a hard thing to even know how would she even say that to her parents? How would they even make sense of this? That this overarching meaning system, that there's a transcendent reality, just becomes more and more unbelievable to people. And not as necessarily for most people as a flat out rejection. It just becomes something that's hard to think about. It's hard to even have any way of imagining it. So that becomes the negative element. The positive element of this, however, is that people deeply, deeply yearn for meaning and are looking to construct it and deeply want to construct it. So like I said earlier, this is built off the Canadian, the Montreal, the Quebecois, it's important to say, philosopher Charles Taylor from McGill in Montreal, who's written this really thick book called A Secular Age. Now, what you need to know about A Secular Age, 770 pages, is if your office, the wind blows through it and slams the door, this is a perfect book to keep your door open on a windy day. Like it will just keep it open. It is a thick book. If the person who shares the office next to you, you want to hurt them, drop this book on their head. Like it is a thick, thick book. And what's kind of overwhelming about the book, it's 770 pages, and he only wants to answer one question. I mean, that'll make you dizzy. He wants to answer one question, and he wants to narrow in how he wants to answer it. So he wants to answer one question, but only for the West. He doesn't even want to look at this globally. He just wants to look at the leftovers of Latin Christendom and how our Western institutions function and then get globalized to the world. And this is his one question. It's basically the question we've been exploring all morning and afternoon. He wants to know, if we just look at big, bold numbers and we just go back to 1500, why in the Western societies in 1500 was it nearly impossible to not believe in God? You had a hard time functioning inside of a society in 1500 and not believe in God. In a short 500 years, just again a big, bold 2000, by 2000, in most Western societies, actually America as the outlier, and continental Europe and Canada and the UK, it is much, much easier to not believe in God than to believe in God in societies. What happened in those 500 years? So he takes 770 pages to answer just that one question. Now, what will really make you nauseous is that you really have to read it 4 times to kind of get what's going on. All right, so it's a very difficult process that way. But this is why some of us keep reading him, because it's really fascinating. Because he says this kind of fragilization, it is a two-way fragilization. It's a two-way fragilization. So it works like this. Let's say you're somebody who's believed your whole life. You grew up in Sunday school, you went through confirmation or whatever, you believe. You went to a Christian college, you're a pastor now. You believe. It says you can't help it. Once in a while, you will have these moments where you will find your belief fragilized, where you'll say to yourself, ugh, is this true? I mean, is this really true? If I would have been born somewhere else in the world to a different family, would I believe this? No. It's true. But for that moment, you find yourself fragilized. And then you go on and you just start living your life, and then you find yourself fragilized again. And you have this moment where you think, oh, is religion true? Or is this just an evolutionary trick? I mean, is all religion is false pattern recognition writ large? Is that all this is? No, I believe it. He says, for those of us who are people who believe, and he counts himself as a committed Catholic, as someone who believes, he says, we can't help it, that we will find our faith at times fragilized. There's only a very small percentage of people, like a very sliver of percentage of people who can believe without ever doubting. And we call those people religious fundamentalists. But everyone else is having a moment where they find these episodes of feeling fragilized. But like I said, it's a two-way. So he says, let's say you're a young adult. Let's say you live in Austin, Texas. You move down to Austin to start an app and get your band going, and you're educated at an elite university, and come on, people. Religion? Come on. All religion is a historical reality used by people in power to keep other people down. That's all it is. Come on. And when you die, you go to heaven. That's so cute. Come on. Grow up. When you die, it's like a TV set that's on. You unplug it. It just goes dark. That's all that happens. Get over it. Taylor's point is that's you. Your belief system is that you don't believe. He says, you too will find yourself fragilized. You will have a moment where you find yourself believing inside your unbelief. So for instance, your sister says, you have to come hear your nephew play the Christmas concert. You don't want to go. You have a couple drinks after happy hour. You stumble into the concert hall. You sit in the back. It's Christmas season. And all of a sudden, the Bach concert starts. Dun, 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 dun. And the music hits you. And for a moment, you feel something reach for you. You feel like there's more. You feel like something explodes these categories of reduction that you've had, and that there's something bigger in the world. And you find your unbelief fragilized, and you find yourself believing. Or maybe you get sad news that your mother's died. She lives back home a few states away, so you book a flight, and you need to be there for the funeral, and you fly in, and you're going to spend the time at your cousin's house who still lives in town, and you go through the day of the burial and the funeral, and it's sad. It's really sad. And that night, you have a flight the next morning, and you spend that night after the funeral just up late talking and drinking and reminiscing about your mom, and you remember the funny thing she did, and they make you laugh and they make you cry, but you remember this 80s song that she used to always put on, and she would clean the kitchen doing this just embarrassing dance, and it makes you laugh hard with your brother and your cousins, and you cry harder, and you end up going to bed too late. We have an early morning flight, and you wake up late, and you get all your suitcase packed quickly and you get out to your rental car and you put the key in the ignition of the rental car and you back up and the radio's been left on. And all of a sudden, there it is. That very same 80s song is on the radio. And you have a choice. You can think, oh my gosh, Jeffrey Bezos is listening to everything we say. Or you can find your unbelief fragilized and wonder, is there something bigger? Is there something larger that cares for me? Is there something that's reaching out to me? It becomes this deep two-way sense of fragilization. And his point is, this is what it means to live in a secular age, is that all belief becomes fragilized. And so there's only a very, very small sliver of people who cannot believe and never find themselves believing. And we call those people British New Atheists, which that joke always bombs, but I keep going back to it because I think it's damn funny, and no one else ever does. But all right. It actually is a really good joke, I think. I mean, think about it. And you know it's a good joke when you have to, yeah. I'm gonna just keep saying it until you laugh, yeah. You know it's a good joke when you have to tell people it's funny. So, but this is his point of what it means to live in this secular age, is that it's this two-way fragilization, and that's inside of this that we live. But inside of this two-way fragilization, nevertheless, all of us, whether we are people who believe and find our belief fragilized, or people who don't believe and have these moments where we find ourselves believing, that we all live inside of what he calls an immanent frame. Immanent frame. So this is what he says. There's a picture of nice old Charles Taylor. Don't you want to give him a hug? He says, the immanent frame is a constructed social space that frames our lives entirely within a natural rather than a supernatural order. It is a circumscribed space of the modern social imaginary that precludes transcendence. All right, it is late in the day, and it is a scientific fact that philosophers' quotes have tryptophan in them. So this is making you deeply, deeply tired and exhausted. But this is what he's getting at, is that we all have a certain sense. You just get this living inside the institutions and the larger cultures of the society that you live in, that we all have a kind of default setting. And if you were a secular zero person, your default setting, like your phone when you take it out of the box and it's been set on defaults, that your default setting was a frame that was more supernatural than natural. So something peculiar happens and you assume there's a devil or there's a demon or there's some spiritual answer. His point is, we have a frame that is an immanent one. We tend to assume things are more natural and material than supernatural. This is just the way we exist. So it becomes hard. I mean, even listening to this beautiful story of this young woman who says Jesus spoke to her, it's very easy for people in this room to have their first knee-jerk reaction to be psychological issue. I don't know. I mean, stress because of the end of the semester. Or you even could think maybe it is Jesus, but it'd be very dangerous to send her down that path because it could lead to weird stuff, even though maybe that's the heart of what pastoral ministry is with her, which is there might be something there. You need to follow that. And I'll walk with you to follow that. Let's figure out what that is. Let's figure out what's going on in the midst of that. But the immanent frame makes us very kind of uncomfortable with that. But okay, this whole thing of immanent frame, circumscribed space, modern social imaginary, that's how Taylor says it. I think it's most helpful to listen to a pop star's lyrics to help this make sense. Now that makes me seem very cool, except this song's like 12 or 13 years old. But don't think about that. Just think about how cool I am. All right. So this is actually a song from the British pop star Lily Allen. Do people know who Lily Allen is? I'm going to probably say my most controversial thing I've said all day, and I did say a bunch of things about the market. So this is going to be pretty controversial. And Lily Allen is this British pop star, was popular again, don't hold on to this, but like 12, 13 years ago. But she is who Katy Perry wants to be. You know what I mean? So that could be very controversial to those of you who love Katy Perry. All right, so she has a song called The Fear. You can see my jokes are really culturally on point too, talking about Katy Perry and Lily Allen. But here's one of her lyrics from a song called The Fear. And this gives you a vibe of kind of who she is. She's very irreverent, middle finger in your face. She says, life's about film stars and less about mothers, but it doesn't matter because I'm packing plastic, and that's what makes my life so effing fantastic. Now, I will be very honest with you. I have no idea what that means. Like, no idea in any way what that means. And I think it is a very dangerous thing to try to exegete pop stars' lyrics. So I'm not so sure what packing plastic means. It probably means she has a credit card with a major credit limit on it. More than likely, it means she's had one part of her body enhanced. That therefore becomes the measure of the good life. But you get the kind of vibe of this, right? It's very kind of irreverent, middle finger in your face. This is the line I want you to see. She says, now I'm a weapon of massive consumption. It's not my fault. It's how I'm programmed to function. Here it is. Now, I'm not a saint, but I'm not a sinner. Now, everything's cool as long as I'm getting thinner. I'm not a saint. I'm not a sinner. Now everything's cool as long as I'm getting thinner. Now it is supposed to very much send you back on your heels. That's the point. But it is interesting. It's an interesting picture of what the imminent frame is. For most of human history, at least coming out of the Christian traditions and the societies that were wrestling with Christianity, particularly out of the West, people cared deeply. Are they a saint or are they a sinner? Are they bound for heaven or are they bound for hell? What's going on here? What does God think of them? It kept people up at night. The patron saint of my tradition, Martin Luther, could not sleep as a monk, wondering to know what God thought of him. Is he a saint or is he a sinner? He wore out poor Johann Stupitz confessing his sins to him, to the point that Stupitz had to tell him, do not come back until you actually have done something. Because Luther would confess and walk away and go, oh my gosh, I feel so unburdened by this. And then go, oh my gosh, I feel unburdened by this. Maybe that's not right. I'm going to go confess for feeling unburdened by this. And he couldn't get around it. And he finally had his breakthrough rereading Romans. And one of his beautiful constructive articulations was, it's really not an either or. It's a both and. You are both saint and sinner simultaneously. And at least to Northern Europeans, that was a great balm for centuries. For that you were neither saint nor you were simultaneously saint and sinner, all the way up until 2012 when Lily Allen wrote her song. All right, we're not going to give her that much credit, but she does reflect something. She basically says categories of saint or sinner never once kept me up in the middle of the night. Never once did I wake up in the middle of the night and go, oh, what does God think of me? Am I bound for heaven or am I bound for hell? Am I a saint or am I a sinner? Not once did she lose a minute of sleep over that. But she has lost a lot of sleep. It's just what has kept her awake, what has shooken her awake in existential terror is not a transcendent reality. It's an imminent one. She has thought, oh my gosh, swimsuit season's coming. What are people going to think of my body? It becomes an imminent reality as opposed to a transcendent reality. So Taylor says this. He says, we can't help looking over our shoulders from time to time, looking sideways, living our faith in a condition of doubt and uncertainty. And what he means by that is that we all then, inside of this fragilization, and even inside the imminent frame, and this way that the imminent frame in some ways like catches us. He calls it cross pressure. We get crossed up. So she does wake up in the middle of the night wondering, not if I'm a saint, am I a sinner, but am I getting thinner? She does wake up with that terror that we find ourselves crossed up. And we see that with her. So we get these verses of, I'm a weapon of massive consumption. It's not my fault. It's how I'm programmed to function. I'm packing plastic. That's what made my life so effing fantastic. But in the chorus, we get this deep kind of existential yearning where she says, I don't know what's right or what's real anymore. I don't know how I'm meant to feel anymore. When do you think it all becomes clear? Because I'm being overtaken by the fear. So you see even her get crossed up. She has a deep yearning for something. So this kind of secular three age, what it points to is people desperately need, dare I say, not an entrepreneur. They need a pastor to walk them into the fear, to wrestle with, is there something more? I feel haunted by there's something more, and yet I can't assume there is something more. I need someone to pray with me. I need someone to walk with me, that becomes significant. Now, what we should do, which would make so much sense, is for me to play this song for you now. But that makes too much sense. So I want to play you a different song. And this one I feel like gives me a little bit more cool cred, because this comes from an independent band that, honestly, I don't have any cool cred because I didn't listen to them. Someone listened to the song and say, hey, this reminds me of what you're talking about. So I stole it from this person, Canadian person, because I made fun of Canadians. We need to know they are cultural elites. But this, thank you. So this song comes from an independent band, and I don't know if you know who this band is. You're really cool. The band is called Purple Mountains, and the song I want to play for you is called "Margaritas at the Mall." So I need to warn you and just make you aware of a few things. Is this song you're going to see the song will play and you'll see the lyrics come up. So I want you to kind of watch it and what lyric kind of bounces it out to you. But a few things you need to know. One, you need to know that this songwriter, the lead singer, Johnny Cash, which I think is kind of cool. And so that's one element, is to listen for that. The other thing I have to warn you about as you listen to this, and I have to just tell you that I'm really deeply, deeply sorry about this, that this song is so catchy, it is going to get caught so deep in your mind that 3-4 days from now, you're going to be unloading the dishwasher and you're going to start humming Margaritas at the Mall. You're going to wake up, if you're of the age that has to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night, you're going to get up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom, and you are going to start humming Margaritas at the Mall. But when that happens, I want you to stop. And I want you to pray. And I want you to say, God, are you telling me now to buy an Andy Roop book on Amazon? All right, sorry. That was the most crass, terrible joke ever. Okay, it will get stuck in your head, but don't worry about the buy the book stuff. I mean, you can if you want, but you know what I mean. The last thing to say is this is not a guy who's in any kind of faith community. He has never darkened the door of a church ever. He has someone who gave up belief a long, long time ago. And yet I find these lyrics incredibly probing.
Just drinking margaritas at the mall. That's what this stuff adds up to after all. Magenta, orange, acid green, peacock blue and burgundy. Drinking margaritas at the mall. Of the signpost on the road, We're just drinking margaritas at the mall. 'Cause happy hours got us by the ball. Magenta, orange, acid green, peacock, blue and burgundy. Drinking margaritas at the mall. We're drinking margaritas at the mall. Drinking margaritas at the mall.
Does anyone want to throw out the lyric that jumped out to them? Subtle God. Yeah. And how long can the world go on under such a subtle God? Now, again, I want to remind you that this is not a guy who spent his life in the church, and this is a person who never has been part of any faith community, and asks, how long can the world go on under such a subtle God? How long can the world go on under no new word from God? It's a powerful, powerful phrase, which is saying this is the burdens of bearing this kind of secular age. This kind of secular age is that the voice of a living God is hard to hear, and yet we yearn to hear it. But you see, part of my push to you is that if we see our issues as secular 2 issues instead of secular 3 issues, then all of a sudden you think what good ministry looks like is, well, margaritas. I mean, don't get me wrong. If you had a margarita machine at your church, there's some upside to that. I'm not trying to downside that. But it is amazing how many conversations we have about the perils of Protestantism in America, and the answer is, get a barista at your church. It becomes some kind of, maybe it's hipsterized, but it's some kind of mall to attract. And yet what he's saying is, how long can the world go on under no new word from God? How long can the world go on under such a subtle God? And then he wants to tell us it's margaritas at the mall. It's what all this stuff adds up to after all. And so this is the perils and maybe the advantages of living in this kind of secular age. Is guess what you get? You get release from the consequences of Jonathan Edwards reminding you that you are in the hands of a judging God. You get release from divine consequence. But the problem is, you may find out that all you have is sugar water with a little vodka in it. And can you live a life in that? And this is a young man's not so sure. Not so sure, haunted by deeper questions, but's not even sure how to get in them. And then he stumbles into our churches. I don't know if he did this, but essentially stumbles into this churches, and what he's offered are margaritas that are just like the mall. Not a way to hear the word of the living God again. In its possibilities and maybe even in its terrors, but always in its invitations to somewhere deeper. So again, not to maybe overplay the analogy of this song, but it's very, very tempting to think that the only churches that will survive are those that can look like a mall. I mean, my gosh, 80s, 90s, that's what we thought. It's that you have to make your church look like a mall or you got no hope. And yet we have generations of young people and not so young people anymore who want to know, how long can the world go on under such a subtle God? Maybe the core of what pastoral ministry is and a congregation is to wrestle with these deep questions. It's not easy inside of an immanent frame, but the immanent frame can be broken open by these deep questions. Now, I do have to tell you, this guy, this artist's name is David Behrman, I think is his last name, and he was kind of more of a poet even than a songwriter, but just before COVID or just after it, he ended up committing suicide. So, I mean, I tell you that in one level just to kind of think about this, that that we know as people who have been in American Protestant congregations that there are consequences to belief. Like we're finding Twitter playing out the consequences of belief. But it's so easy in a social media world to go from one extreme to the next. And what David Berman would remind you is there are consequences to no belief. There are consequences to flattening reality down, to having nothing bigger within it. And I just think at the core of pastoral ministry that there's a possibility here, the possibility to walk with people in the midst of these big questions. So let me conclude by telling you a story that maybe lands the plane a little bit and illustrates maybe what this looks like. So a few years ago, I went to the Pacific Northwest to do some interviews for an academic book I was writing, because I had read this book as I was researching for this book I was writing. It was by T.M. Lerman, Tanya Lerman, called When God Talks Back. I don't know if anyone has seen this book. It's probably 8 years old now. Really interesting book, won a bunch of awards. And what the book is trying to explore is it says, amongst our society and culture, there's so many divides, but one that we haven't really explored is that in American culture, there's a small group of people, but they're there nevertheless, who talk very easily about God speaking to them. God tells them all sorts of things. And then we have other people who literally share a cubicle wall with those people, who believe that anyone who says God talks to them, well, that person must be out of their mind. Like there must be a problem going on here. So as a good anthropologist, and she teaches at Stanford, and she's a psychological anthropologist, which I didn't know those existed, but she teaches at Stanford, so it must be true. And so she decided that she was going to interview these people. So as a good anthropologist, she joined a Vineyard Church in the Chicagoland area and spent 3 years in this community. And then she moved to Northern California and spent another 3 years with another community. And she said, the book ends in the most beautiful way. She says, now, can you say that people who say that God speaks to them, that this is like some kind of low-grade schizophrenia or something? And she says, absolutely not. There is no correlation to any kind of mental distress in people who say God speaks to them. You can't say that. She said, well, then can I say God is talking to them? She said, well, I'm an anthropologist at a secular research university, and I like having tenure, so I'm not really going to say if they really are speaking to God or not. But what I can tell you is that during my 6 years living with this community, my father died, and their prayer saw me through. It's beautiful. And I thought, man, that's so fascinating. That, well, what would happen if you went to a couple communities, a couple kind of denomination Christian communities, Christian traditions, where they weren't rewarded for talking about God? Like in the Vineyard Pentecostal tradition, you kind of get rewarded in your community for saying God talks to you. You go to a Lutheran or Presbyterian church, no one pats you on the back when you say God spoke to you. So I went and I was doing this thing called life history interviewing, which is you write like 12 big questions and you interview these people and you just talk for an hour, and on their permission you record it and then you transcribe it and look for themes. So there's only 12 people. I tell you that just so you're not like thinking this is a national study or anything. It was 12 people, but I went to 2 Presbyterian churches and a Lutheran church. And I asked these 12 people, who are all nominated by their pastor, if they ever had an experience where God spoke to them. And what was fascinating is all 12 of these people said they did. And a few of them said, oh, I hate it. I had a man in his probably late 70s who said, oh my gosh, I hate it. I hate it so much. I hate it so much when anyone ever says God speaks to them. I never believe them. I hate when anyone ever says God speaks to them. But one time, everyone had an at least one time story. Now, again, this is only 12 people. But then I said to these 12 people, and they were beautiful stories. I said, wow, this is amazing. I said, have you ever told anyone in your church this story? Nope, never told anyone in their church. I said, well, surely you told your pastor because your pastor nominated you to talk to me, and so surely your pastor knows the story. Nope, never told my pastor. Folks, how long can the world go on under such a subtle God? This God isn't subtle. We're not narrating these stories. But the one I want to conclude with is the final interview I did, which was the youngest woman in my youngest person in my sample, and she's probably about 35. Her name was Rachel, And she came into her pastor's office to have this hour-long conversation, and she looked like she wanted to be anywhere except with me. Like she just was not happy to be there. And she was like, every question I had, the whole point of this is these questions, you just have a conversation. And she was like, yes, no, yeah, 2 sentences, let's move on. I was like, gosh, this is not working. She's like, I'm a single mom. I'm super busy. I'm a single mom. I'm super busy. I'm super busy. I'm a single mom. Yeah. No, we like this church. Yeah, and on and on I went. And I was like, gosh, this isn't working. So there's about 7 minutes left in our time, and I just thought I would ask her one more question. I was out of questions, and I would ask her just one more, and then we would be finished. And I said to her, Rachel, have you ever had an experience where you felt so deeply ministered to, you felt like it was the presence of Jesus Christ? And her whole disposition changed, and she says, I have. She said, I never told anyone this story. She says, throughout this interview, I've been telling you that I'm a single mom, but I've never told you why I'm a single mom. She said, 4.5 years ago, my husband got on a flight, flew from Seattle to Chicago. He was on a business trip. She said, after 13 hours, I got a phone call. She said on the other line was this very awkward young man, and he kept stopping and starting and saying, hi, ma'am. Hi, I'm calling from, oh, gosh. Okay, so ma'am, I'm calling from the hotel your husband, okay, I'm really sorry, I've never, so ma'am, so there seems to have been, so ma'am, I'm calling, so ma'am, I'm calling because there seems to have been an accident. Gosh, I'm so sorry. So, ma'am, our cleaning crew went into your husband's room today. Well, ma'am, your husband is dead. Our cleaning crew went into your husband's room today. There had been a terrible accident. We called the ambulance. They got there. As soon as they arrived, they said that he had passed, that he had probably passed in the night. My manager is now dealing with it. I've been asked to call you and give you the hospital morgue that we've sent his body to. She says, as he's saying this on the other line, it doesn't even make any sense. Like it doesn't compute. And then once it computes, just like this, she says that she sees all the color sucked out of the room, and she's just now living in black and white. She's got a toddler and like a kindergartner, and she thinks to herself, her first thought that goes into her head is, my life is over. How do I move on from this? She takes out a business card. She writes the address to the hospital morgue on it. She hangs up with this awkward man at the hotel. She calls her mother to come stay with her kids, and she books a flight. She knows no one in Chicago. She's going to fly into O'Hare. She's going to go to the hospital morgue. She's going to identify the body. She's going to sign the paperwork to have the body sent back to Seattle, and she's going to go home. She says, I flew to Chicago, and she said that flight lasted 5 minutes, lasted 5 days. I was so deeply drowning in grief, I didn't even know if I was in time. She said, I got to O'Hare Airport, I walked down to the cab stand, and I gave the cabbie the card, and he drove. She said, I should have noticed this. I should have noticed that he parked the car. But she said, I wasn't aware of anything. She said, I got in, they had my itinerary, they knew when I was going to arrive, and immediately they took me to a side room. And she said it felt again like 2 hours. It was a minute maybe as she waited there. She said this was going to be it. This was going to be the moment. She said, sure enough, the door opens, they wheel a gurney in, and she waits there. And the man from the hospital morgue grabs a sheet to pull it back so she can identify her husband's body. And just as he starts to pull it back, she says she felt a hand on her shoulder, and an arm came around the front with a water bottle. And she started to cry. And she said, it was the cabbie. It was the cabbie. And then she said to me, I never felt more ministered to. She said, I wasn't sure how I was going to put my life back together, but I got it back on that plane, and I knew God had not abandoned me, that Jesus Christ was with me. And then she said again, I've never told anyone that story. How long can the world go on under such a subtle God? Jesus Christ is moving. And yet inside our imminent frame or our distraction of fewer and fewer people are coming, we miss these very narratives that can renew us. that we can wrestle with. I don't know how to turn them into funding models. I don't know. But I know we have no way forward if we forget that this is a God that takes what is dead and brings life out of it. This is a God who ministers to the heartbroken, that the church is a place where we confess our need for one another and our need for God. And in the midst of this, I know nothing. This is completely fictional, but I know nothing about this cabbie. But he needs a community too. He needs a Bible study to stumble into on a Tuesday night or a Wednesday night and go, I got to tell you what happened to me. I was on the last run of my day. I had been up all night. And this woman, this is going to be my last one. I was going to drop her off. I was going to go home. I was going to go to sleep. She handed me this card. I looked at it. I caught her eye in the rearview mirror, and I saw this incredible sadness in her face. And I looked at that card, and I thought, oh, I know that place. Because when my cousin Ronnie had his heart attack at work, that's where they took him. And I remember it. I remember my auntie throwing herself on the ground, wailing in grief. And I heard something in me. I heard something say to me, do not leave her alone. Do not leave her alone. So I just went in. And all I knew to do was put my hand on her shoulder and give her a water bottle. But I don't know. And then I gave her a hug and I left her there. I don't know. I don't know what to make of this. Needs a community. Needs a pastor that says, behold, the Lord has moved. You've been God's servant in the world. This God is blessing those who mourn. Your God is at work in the world. And yet, it's so easy to be distracted by making our churches feel like malls. And we shouldn't demonize that. That needs to happen. That needs to happen. But what makes ministry ministry is wrestling with people's deepest longings, is walking with people in the midst of these ruptures of utter impossibility and saying in a sure voice, but a humble one, that the God of Israel is found at dead places, bringing life out of death, ministering new life to those who grieve. Let me pray for us really quickly. I don't know. I just feel like that was a sermon, and I should probably pray at the end of it, and then we'll turn it over to. Or no, you want to take it from there? Okay. Let me pray for us quickly. God, thank you for this day, and thank you for these folks. And we pray, ultimately, God, we pray for vision, that you would give us the ability to see what it is you're calling us to. But first and foremost, see that you are active in the world. So bless us, God. Amen.